Welcome to Statutes and Stethoscopes, where million-dollar verdicts are won or lost on medical evidence and where the chart never lies. We take you inside the high-stakes world where medicine meets justice. From forensic pathologists who read death like a story, to trial attorneys who turn complex medical records into courtroom victories. These are the voices that matter when everything is on the line. Discover how expert witnesses survive cross-examination, uncover red flags in nursing home records, and learn why the right medical insight can change everything. This is Justice in Action, where every case could be someone's last chance for truth. Here's your host, Tracy Liberatore.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Statutes and Stethoscopes. In a world where the vulnerable are too often overlooked, today's guest has built a career standing in the gap. After cutting his teeth at a larger firm, he founded the Shannon Law Group with a simple mission: to provide deeply personal, justice-driven representation. He's litigated everything from nursing home negligence and medical malpractice to civil rights and catastrophic injuries across Pennsylvania and West Virginia. He holds Allegheny County's largest nursing home verdict and has secured multiple seven-figure settlements for his clients. But perhaps the most groundbreaking work came in Thrower v. Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where he helped extend civil rights protections to the mentally disabled, setting a powerful precedent for future advocacy. He's a Pennsylvania super lawyer, a published author, and an award-winning filmmaker whose work has even been featured in the New York Times. When he's not in the courtroom, you'll find him in the woods, on the slopes, or between the pages of the Overstory. Please welcome to Statutes and Stethoscopes, attorney, storyteller, and relentless advocate, Chad P. Shannon.
Thank you so much. That was, I feel like I should hire you to be my hype person. That was a wonderful intro. I always feel good about myself, but I feel great about myself.
That's good. That is the goal. So in this episode, trial attorney Chad P. Shannon is going to share the powerful story behind his landmark civil rights case, insights on nursing home litigation, and what he looks for in medical experts. He opens up about the challenges of practicing purpose-driven law. He takes on the healthcare system and why clients choose him over big firms. And I want you to stay tuned to the end for tips that every new lawyer should hear. So, Chad, you've spent your career advocating for people often overlooked by the system, those injured in nursing homes, hospitals, or even while under the state care. What first drew you to this kind of work?
You know, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer when I went to Ohio University in the mid to late 90s. I didn't jump right into it, but eventually I drew back to what I knew I wanted to do, which was help people. I didn't know how I was going to do that when I went to law school, but I knew that's what I wanted to do. And as I got through law school, I realized that the best way to do that would be a trial attorney. And then I got a job working as a plaintiff's trial attorney right out of law school. And immediately I knew I'd made the right decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something a lot of people that you hear all these lawyer jokes and people talk about, just usually not in good humor, right? We're always kind of the butt of the joke, but I always turn that around and say, who's the first person you call when you're in trouble?
Oh, there's a famous story if you're in Pennsylvania. Rick Santorum, I think it was a very tort reformist kind of senator. It was a Republican senator who was a tort reform advocate, and then their wife was injured somehow. That was an amazing turnabout, which often happens. I face that all the time. There's anytime I take on a new client, I'm going to end up telling a lot of stories, but
it's okay.
I took a recent new client and we were having our initial call and he came as a very hot lead, meaning he was from a friend of mine and that the friend we had in common was this guy's best man in his wedding.
Okay.
It was a very good hot lead. And so we're talking and he's just sort of off. And I said, hey, what's wrong? He said, I feel so bad about this. And I said, bad about what? And he said, I feel so bad about filing a lawsuit. And, I just smiled because I've seen this and heard this so many different times. And I said, look, the business where you were injured, they carried insurance. They carry insurance to cover situations like this. You are not harming the business. You are not harming the person who owns the business. They smartly got themselves insurance, and that's what you're going to be collecting on, not against the person. And I think a lot of people misunderstand that when it's a smaller business and that kind of thing. I think they think that they're impacting that person's bottom line, and most times they're not.
Yeah, no, you're right. I hear that a lot too. Like people, oh, well, I don't want to file a lawsuit. I feel bad. It's like, did they feel bad when they injured you? So Chad, you've had an impressive range of cases, but one that really stands out is the civil rights victory, the one involving the mentally disabled. Tell us a little bit about the story behind Roe v. Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and why that matters to you so much.
Sure. I spent 11 years at my first firm working on nursing home cases. I worked for a very smart guy who figured out a way of suing the county-run facilities, because what we were getting were a ton of calls where, hey, my grandma, my mom, my dad was at a nursing home. They fell, they developed a pressure ulcer, they walked out the front door into the freezing cold. It wasn't found until the next day. And so he found this way of taking civil rights law and finding an avenue within the federal courts to sue the nursing homes. And so we got a call from a lady who said, hey, look, my daughter was at a facility and she was fine in terms of her physical health, but she did have some developmental problems. And because of that, she also had some behavioral problems. And it turned out that what happened was she was kind of having a normal day for her, which was an agitated day. And they gave her 2 back-to-back shots of Haldol. And even though this young lady was like 200 pounds plus, put her down like an animal in a zoo, she did not ever wake up. She died.
Oh,
and we just said, I said to the guy I worked with, I said, maybe we can do this for her and her family. And we looked at the laws, and the way it works is that, when you have a nursing home, you have a nursing home that typically accepts Medicare, Medicaid money. When you do that as a nursing home, what happens is you are saying that you will abide by the regulations that are set forth in various laws that were enacted to protect people in nursing homes. What that means is you have to give a minimum of what these rules say. So we looked at what was the same kind of statutory and regulatory path against a facility that was a group home for mentally challenged and mentally retarded children. And not only children, but anybody that had those issues. We filed that case, and just as we expected, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania sent us their best attorney general to fight it, a guy I deeply respect, and I think he just retired after like 40 years. And we litigated and battled like the Dickens. And we ended up convincing the court that we should overcome the motion for summary judgment. For those people who happen to be watching this that's not a lawyer, what that means is that they try to kick your case out based on the law. And the judge said, no, he thinks that there's enough for us to pursue it. And then what we did was we litigated it, and then we got to the point where the parties decided to mediate it, and we resolved it. I'm not able to talk about that, but because the case is filed, I can talk about anything about what happened to the young lady.
Okay. Is there anything else that you think would be that the audience might appreciate about that story, or can you talk about what law was changed, or I'm not sure, how deep we could go with that?
Yeah. So, what you do, so if there's young practitioners watching this, and I'm assuming based on the nature of this podcast that most of your audience is going to be young lawyers, so they're not going to need re-educated on everything that happens. But, the civil rights arena of lawsuits, you are able to file most cases under 1983 action. And so what we did is we filed this as under 1983 action and said, she's been deprived of her rights. Now you say to yourself, well, what does that mean? How do you have civil rights at a nursing home or at a personal care or at a group home for the mentally challenged? And how that works is that, it's substantive due process, basically. And so under the statutes of the United States government, you are entitled to the basic care that these facilities are supposed to provide you. And so when they don't have policies or procedures or practices that ensure that you are protected against two Haldol shots, that turns out to be a violation. It's much different than the violations we learn about in law school. Typically, we learn about the ones that happen both like, the unreasonable search and seizure of your car or of your home, or we learn about the civil rights of the 1960s with the restaurants and the people of color not being treated the same as whites. That's our frame of reference, but you can use civil rights anytime that a statute is implemented or is implicated. And so what I would say to the viewers out there is when you're thinking about what happens at various locations and you're trying to figure out how to pursue the case, consider, is there a federal statute that governs what happens here? And in the case of homes, nursing homes and group homes, that is, I think it's the Medicare Omnibus Reconciliation Act of 1987.
Now, seeing how the F tags and stuff, is this side that kind of play in with nursing homes a lot? Do they kind of go hand in hand because they are federally regulated, or is that something different?
So, we can get into the nitty gritty of these cases. The nursing home case, this is an issue that comes up a lot in nursing home cases. We say in our complaints, hey, look, you're obligated under law to provide the minimum care in these regulations. And for example, one of the regulations that you're calling F-tag, and an F-tag typically comes up when there's been a violation at a nursing home. But what we say is, look, you have an obligation to provide a care plan at a nursing home. And to all the nurses and practitioners out there, that means that when you go to a nursing home, they've got to give you an assessment. And based on that assessment, they've got to put things into place that protect you. Are you a risk for falls? Then they got to put interventions in to prevent you from falling. Are you a little bit older and is your skin a little bit thin? That means that you're going to be at risk for pressure ulcers. They've got to put a plan in place for that. Are you a little bit demented and prone to walking out the front door, not knowing where in the heck you are? Then you got to put a care plan in for elopement. Elopement means leaving without permission. And so these are the things that are required. And so when these things go wrong, the reality is and defense lawyers won't want to hear this, but the reality is you kind of already have a built-in violation of the regulation. You have to prove it through experts, and yourself, all about experts. There are great experts who testify that about how these things work, right? And then here's the golden thing, the golden goose for the young practitioners thinking about doing this work. Don't forget what you learned in your first year of torts, is that there is a concept called negligence per se. And if you can show a violation of a regulation that was designed to protect the kind of person that was harmed from the kind of harm that happened, then you can ask the judge for a negligence per se charge. The beauty in that is that when you get a negligence per se charge, the jury doesn't consider liability on that issue anymore. So if you can show that a care plan was violated, and that care plan was violated for falls and your person fell, the whole point of the statute is to protect people against falls in nursing homes. So that is a huge victory. We actually, at my old firm, got to a jury, and the judge did not let the jury have that negligence per se charge. And it turns out that the judge reconsidered after we lost the trial and reversed himself, which is very rare. If you have any questions about how that works, people out there that are listening, please reach out. I can explain it in detail. I can refer you to the right cases so you know how to do it.
What a beautiful explanation, and how you just pulled me right back to my first year. With that felt down. Negligence per se, I don't think I've heard that in a while. That was great. So let's talk about the healthcare system, given your deep involvement with these medical cases, and especially with the vulnerable patients. What is your current take on the state of our healthcare system?
I'm intimately involved with the healthcare system, not only through my cases. My wife's a nurse practitioner. My father is a retired pediatrician who teaches at the Scranton Medical School. I can't think of what it's called. The U, I think they call it the U.
The U, yeah, okay. It's right here in my backyard.
Yeah, he's a pediatrician who now teaches there. My sister-in-law is an acupuncturist. My other sister-in-law is a social worker. My parents, for better or worse, spent many nights in hospitals. And so I've developed a very intimate understanding. I don't hate healthcare or hate hospitals or anybody. I just realized that there's a lot of problems. In my writing career, I spent 5 or 6 years as a writer. I actually wrote some very important for the hospitals, was important to them. I wrote some text about how great this hospital performs a couple of its specialties. I think there's a great place in our society for when things are done right. Problem is, the way of the world with insurance and healthcare is you have for-profit, which becomes a problem. We like to say that there becomes a greed over need problem. Cutting corners, cutting staff, not having enough equipment, not having enough training creates problems. And then you have this sort of quasi nonprofit situation where a lot of these colleges, like University of Pittsburgh, teamed up with a hospital, and that we now call it UPMC. And they are nonprofit, but they generate so much revenue because they are so dominant in so many different areas that, we get calls for problems that happen. Same problems that happen in nursing homes happen in hospitals. Falls, pressure ulcers, elopements. I actually had one case a few years back where someone actually bled out in a hospital, and that seems amazing to me. But there's not much you can throw at me that I haven't handled in either a hospital or a nursing home.
And what are your thoughts on, I know you touched on it a little bit, but we have Geisinger here. It seems like it's probably similar to UPMC nonprofit, but what I call corporate medicine, it seems to be the way things are going. What are your thoughts on the way you see that going? I don't know if it's better or worse. I mean, they certainly have more access to more technology on the one hand, but at the same time, I feel like you lose some of the more personal experience. You don't really even know your doctor anymore. They seem like a number kind of going through a register. It feels like sometimes in these larger systems.
Yeah. I've had some luck. I have a good doctor that usually responds to my calls. One time he wasn't available, I saw his associate. So I don't have a lot of personal experience with that. What I can tell you, I won't name the organization, but I was in a case a few years back when the doctor, I don't think that the lawyer was too happy at the end of the day, because the doctor just gave me, he was one of the targets, and he just gave me the lowdown, the truth about how things had changed when his doctor's office was bought by a facility, how much things changed. He used the word, it went too corporate. We didn't have enough help. They asked too much of us. We didn't have enough people to cover when we couldn't be there. It was like all the horror stories that you could have imagined in your brain were being said in this deposition. So I don't need to surmise or give an opinion. I actually have firsthand knowledge of what may happen when, you have a practice that knows its people, has its routines, has its way of doing business, then they're forced to go, quote unquote corporate. Has problems.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's the whole electronic medical record issue. I remember when that whole thing got implemented here, being a patient, I was pregnant, I went in and they were more focused on the computer than the fact that I was in labor, and I was just cursing at the nurses, like, I am a patient, you don't want to be a patient on the day that gets implemented. I thought that was kind of scary.
Especially the pregnancy, that's not a simple thing. I went to a follow-up appointment with my doctor just after that was implemented, and the same thing, he never looked at me. Never.
Yeah, the face is buried in the computer.
This guy was not young. It's not like he, was just a new doctor trying to figure out everything and then also do the electronic stuff. So, but yeah, the current doctor I have, there's not a computer in sight. So, but yeah, I remember there was a case I was involved in right when this started with the electronic medical records. And we talked to some experts, and there was alarming predictions on the number of injuries and deaths that were anticipated by that transition, because things would get missed in favor of checking the boxes.
Yes.
And that's ultimately what this all comes down to. We're not boxes to be checked. We're people.
Right.
And we have needs and we have expectations. And so when you check boxes, problems happen. When you focus on the care of the patient, of the resident, then things usually work out. Sometimes there are still problems, but I like my chances when people are paying attention over checking boxes.
No, for sure. I mean, the other issue I always saw when I was practicing as a PA was, the pop-up screens would constantly be popping up. And they were supposed to be warning you about either a drug interaction or something else, but it happened so much, you got to the point where you weren't even reading it anymore. You're just trying to get on to do your job. And it's like, at what point has this kind of gone too far in the wrong direction? And now it's like a hindrance instead of a help that it was supposed to be when it was, I'm sure, initially conceived.
A few years back, these pharmacies started going to these companies that did all the communications between the pharmacy doctor's office and the insurance company. Because that is a nightmare, doing that by hand, doing that by phone call. A doctor's office gets a request for a prior authorization. They got to fax it to the right insurance entity. And when you're talking about Medicare and Medicaid, that could be a quadrillion, right? Then you got to ensure it gets there. Then you got to follow up, make sure they make their decision. Then it has to get back to the pharmacy. The pharmacy then has to keep on checking, like you're updating your phone to see who won the Powerball. You have to keep on hitting refresh. So that kind of process is inefficient and people get hurt. So that's a development I can point to. I think it's a good development.
Yeah, that's good. So let's talk a little bit about some of your writing and the filmmaking. I find this really interesting. How do your creative projects complement your work as a lawyer?
I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Anytime you read a book on writing and they talk about character and story, it's easy to say, well, those are my clients and that's their case. And we all are our own characters in somebody's world, right? Our own world, other people's worlds, the world of a medical malpractice case where the character in that story of the doctor's patient in a nursing home, same kind of idea. And so there's so much similarity. I got some firsthand experience with this when I kind of wanted to not go to my grave saying, I wish I would have done something. So I took a break to be a writer. And my first client unexpectedly was my father. I'd come back to Pittsburgh after we moved to Nashville for a year for my wife to get her nurse practitioner degree. And I said to my dad, hey, I'm a writer now and I'm working for a ghostwriter. And what we do is we work with people to tell their stories when they don't have the skills or the time to do so. You've been a great business guy for 40 years. You have a lot of great stories you tell. Let me tell your business story. And he got back to me and he said, I don't want to do that story. He said, but I've been a caregiver for your mother now for 5 years because she had 2 strokes. And I realized that there was absolutely no books for men in being a caregiver. It was always more designed towards women being the caregiver. And he said, men are full of pride. And I'm learning that pride can't get in the way of you being a caregiver. And I thought that was pretty profound. So I said, all right, let me interview you. 20 hours of interviews. We finished the interviews and it's a lot of interviews. I learned a lot about myself. So we have 20 hours of stuff. And then the guy I'm working with, ghostwriter, says, okay, now put that in one outline. And I did. And I knew my dad was going to be surprised when he got the outline. He called me like a couple hours later and he was like in tears. He said, this isn't a caregiving outline. This is a love story. You've written a love story. And I was like, that's what caregiving is. When your spouse or your kid or your parent needs your care, the only way you can do it, the only way you can get through it is through love of that person and love of yourself. And so we explored that in this book about how he found a deeper meaning in their relationship that he thought maybe was lacking before the strokes. And the only title for the book, which came as a kind of an offhand remark, was The Best 7 Years of My Life. Nice. These are the best 7 years of his life with her, taking care of her. To put a further spin on that, why I'm thinking about that a lot lately is I think a lot about my clients' damages. And if I ever need to remember what a wrongful death damage is, I think about what he told me and his experiences. You know, they were best friends. His grieving I'm serious when I say it may have only ended a year ago. He grieved for 6-7 years about his loss. That is when we talk about loss of consortium claims and we talk about wrongful death damages, the non-economic ones. That's what we're talking about. The total collapse of your relationship when someone goes, the total absence of that friendship is just really powerful. And so when I think about my clients and I think about what they go through, I have patience because my dad taught me that you have to have patience to be a caregiver. So that book means a lot to me. And that was my most proud moment in writing. And that was the one that made the New York Times.
Oh, okay. And you said the name of the book. I was going to ask you that too. So that's, if anybody wants to find that book, it sounds like it is an amazing love story. I think it would be a lot of self-discovery too. Discovering not only the other person, but probably a lot about yourself. Yeah,
it's exactly right. There's a quote that I used. I forget who gets credit for it now. Robert Frost, I think. And, essentially the quote goes something like, the only way over it is through it. You can't get over something. You have to go through it. And when you go through it, that's the real stuff.
For sure. Definitely. So let's talk a little bit about your specialty then. You've developed this special practice with nursing home neglect and abuse. What made you choose to specialize in that area? And what makes it so complex from both a legal and a medical standpoint?
There's not a great, interesting story about how I chose it. I had two choices. I was in the firm I was at. I was working in asbestos cases. That field had been litigated for so long, there was nothing new in it. And so when I was working with the one side of the firm, a guy from the other side of the firm said, hey, we're growing this practice and we're going to need help. You just started here. You seem like you're eager to be a trial lawyer. There's going to be trials. Let's do it. And I said, yeah, I'm in. So that was early times in Pittsburgh. I was there was two firms that did it. There might've been 5 of us at first that practiced in this area. I'm proud to say that some of the early law that was created in Allegheny County is law that I helped create. And what I'm talking about is if you practice in Allegheny County, there was a judge named Judge Weddick, and all the discovery motions came before him. And when he made a ruling, people followed it, not only in Allegheny County, which is Pittsburgh, but everywhere in Pennsylvania. And so there was some early stuff dealing with arbitration clauses and the federal regulations we talked about. And so I was right there in the middle of the battle. My name's on some of those cases. And so I really came up in the Pittsburgh nursing home world. So that was the exciting part. That was the part that really got my, got me fueled up for that practice. And it allowed me to help people and people that were, which I later learned, the grieving process, people that were grieving need help. And you're grieving and you don't have the mental or emotional capacity to undertake the massive effort it is to investigate. So it was a thrilling job for so many years to be able to that's all I did. And I'm glad I did it, and I can still do it very well. But now I do a lot more, and I wouldn't be able to do what I do now without that practice.
For sure. So, and then maybe we touched on this a little bit already, but is there anything that happened in your career, either in the beginning or later on, that was something that was like a struggle for you that maybe you were able to overcome, but not something we've talked about already?
Yeah, I'm from Pittsburgh, so we're gritty and we're tough and we get knocked down and we get back up, So we don't typically process things in terms of struggles, but, advocating for someone is a really great responsibility. And when you're advocating for someone, you end up taking on their emotional package, their grieving, their frustrations, their sadness, whatever. Because, when you're dealing in nursing home cases, you're talking about sadness. Grandma died because of a fall. Dad got a pressure ulcer, got infected and died. Mom had dementia, found her way outside, froze to death outside. I mean, they're not, weird cases with good results, in terms of health. They're harsh, difficult cases with death almost all the time. The struggle that I later understood to be a struggle, but at the time just took on, was that when you have so much emotional stuff going on with your clients, you can't take that on. You can't be, I forget what the term is, but there's a term for that. You can't take on their pain, their suffering. You can advocate for it. So I didn't know that was a struggle, but it was burning me out. And I just had to step back and say, what's happening here? And I looked, I said, I'm taking on their cases too personally. So I guess there's a difference between advocating and just drowning yourself in other people's sorrow.
The word, I think, is the empath. You're very empathetic. People that are like that, I'm the same way, tend to take it on. I have a hard time at funerals because I feel like in the room, like everybody's pain is just so heavy. And yeah, it is something you certainly need to learn to almost protect yourself against. It can be very overwhelming at times, for sure. So for young lawyers looking to maybe get into a nursing home, do you have any tips for them? Any specific advice that you would give them?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of organizations that put on sessions that give you the intro. The PAHA, sometimes the Western Pennsylvania Trial Lawyers Association here in Pittsburgh. The national group is the AHA. And I was a member of the AHA for 8-9 years. And I learned so much through going through those seminars. A lot of times there's practical opportunities in those seminars to basically work up a case with more experienced people. But, it's just like anything else. You have to practice it to understand it, to see all the nooks and crannies. But, so there's plenty of opportunity to learn the basics, but you could call me, talk to me about tips, tools. I could put you in touch with other firms that do that kind of work. It's really a tight community of nursing home lawyers. And so if you're interested, we'll certainly welcome you to the club so that you can keep the good practice going. And it's a unique practice. There's a lot of moving parts in a nursing home case. When you do something for a while, I hate to like make this analogy, but it's the one that's coming to my mind. Viruses gain strength when they learn how to work around the body's defenses.
Yes.
The same thing happens. The more nursing home cases, the better the lawyers who represent the nursing home companies get at defending the cases. So it is truly a area which you have to keep present. You have to keep on top of your education, because otherwise you'll be swimming out to sea with no raft.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I hear a lot is you get these charts, and now normal cases maybe a couple hundred pages, but these are like thousands of pages of documents, because there's so much going on with turning and repositioning, and there's more care that I think overall has to be given. And I think in the beginning, not being familiar with those charts and how to just kind of get through one and stuff that you can kind of overlook or what you need to look at could be quite overwhelming. And if you're not used to the way that the chart is organized, I used to get paper charts, and I swear these people would take the chart, throw it down a flight of steps, throw it in a box, and then it was like not, and it was difficult in the beginning to get used to that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah,
it's get easier.
I just had a case it's early, and so I'm not going to say much about it, but yeah, they first sent about 80 pages to the family when they asked. And now I got the arbitration agreement, which is like 100 pages, but there was like 200 and maybe the 250 to 350 pages in the actual chart. So, the family was short at least 100 to 200 pages. You don't always know whether you have the full chart. So there are trips and tricks and tips to be able to get around that. But one of the things that you mentioned about medical records, why a good review of the medical records is, this is why you hire experts. I mean, we can go through the records, and we do, but there's been 2 or 3 times in the last couple of years where I was like, I know I have a case, and I send it to the expert. They're like, you don't. Finding a good expert that is honest with you and isn't just going to say yes to give you a case, because you will be stuck in that case. And the number one way you get challenged in medical malpractice, nursing home, hospital cases is causation. That's the medicine of a case. So if you have a pressure ulcer case, having a wildly big pressure ulcer, stage 4, with, a lot of dead skin and infection, first you go, okay, that's awful. I want to help that family. But if you don't truly study the comorbidities with your expert, you may not find out that the defense is pretty strong in that particular case because of a certain couple problems that person had in their health situation. So I highly advocate finding good, reliable, but honest experts. That's the key, because they'll save you many, many hours of time and many, many thousands of dollars by steering you away from a case that you just can't win, or that there's just not any problems with how the care was given.
For sure. And I know that actually comes with experience, and as an expert does things, and I work with them a lot on this issue. We hire somebody who are new, and I do a lot of training with new experts. And so, they're kind of like, they're not sure in the beginning, and they think that they need to try to help you kind of prove your case. And it's just really explaining to them that, we need to know yes or no, like what happened in the case. There's no like, your job isn't to win this case. That's the lawyer's job. You need to just kind of tell us what's going on and give that non-biased opinion. And I just think that comes the more confidence they get, and just having somebody, I think, to help them understand that. It's not intuitive, because I think they think, okay, this is my client, I need to help them, whatever that looks like. And giving them the answer that they want to hear. I hear that all the time. I can't tell them what they want to hear. Well, the truth is what they want to hear.
Now, the ideal expert is the one, of course, we love experts that testify for both defense and the plaintiff, because ultimately it gives them credibility in front of a jury. Hey, look, the best description ever in a live trial, our expert got a call and our expert got questioned, and the lawyer for the other side said, now, sir, isn't it true that you mostly testify for the plaintiffs? And he just looked at the lawyer and he said, this is dating me. This is before call ID. But he said, when the phone rings, it doesn't tell me if it's a plaintiff or a defense lawyer on the other side. It just rings. I pick it up. And when I pick it up, I listen to the story. And if I can support the story, whether it's a plaintiff or a defendant, I do. And I thought that's ideal. Like, you want somebody that says, I have no particular fondness for one side or the other, and that gives you credibility, which is great. But the ideal witness is one that not only is honest with me, but if I'm working on a case and I say, I just don't think that they were monitoring the labs well enough, and that witness comes back to me and says, it's not a labs problem, it's a communication problem or something. And so one that can educate me, an expert that can say, hey, look, I know you thought it was this kind of case, but it's that kind of case instead. That's a great expert.
Yeah. And so I guess that'll lead me to my next question. Is there anything at the outset when you're really looking to hire that person that you look for that helps you know whether they're going to be kind of good or not, either at the interview or a CV, or, what helps you decide when you pick somebody?
I kind of have probably an off the beaten path viewpoint on CVs. I think they're about worthless. I just like, I don't know until I talk to you whether, you could have all the credentials, Harvard or undergrad in medical school. You could be working at Mount Sinai in New York City, but you may have absolutely no ability to communicate a thought to, a regular person. And at that point, unfortunately for our business is very performative, and you have to have someone who can communicate with a jury. So I'll look at a CV, it'll tell me whether that person, might be qualified, but I'm not impressed until I talk to the person. In Pennsylvania, you have to have the type of expert for the type of case you want to file. So if you have a case against an interventional radiologist, you have to have an interventional radiologist. If it's a cardiac surgeon has to look at it. Nursing home case, you have to have a nursing home, or you have to have a nurse and or a nursing home administrator. So look at it, make sure your person is qualified in the field that you're looking for, but you must talk to that person, or you will have no idea what you're getting.
For sure. Out of all the firms out there handling nursing home cases, why would someone call Chad Shannon over another law firm?
Well, I think to reiterate, I do have a vast amount of experience in Pittsburgh and in Western Pennsylvania in this area. I do have experience in West Virginia, admittedly not as much, but I am one of the more experienced people that you can hire in this side of the state. But more importantly, why I like being out on my own is that I have a third of the amount of cases I used to have. So when the phone rings, I have my clients' names in my phone. When I see John Smith calling, I know he's calling about his spouse's nursing home case that he called me about 3 months ago involving a fall at this particular facility in this particular part of Pennsylvania. Before, I would recognize the name, but it would take me a minute to come up and say, oh, okay, that's that slip and fall case in Pittsburgh or whatever. I know my clients very well. I know what their cases are about, and I am able to provide them what my motto says, which is your case matters, meaning it's your case. It's your only case. It matters to you, so it matters to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just kind of brings me back to what we talked at the beginning for corporate medicine. You know, we kind of lost that personal touch with our doctor. It feels like, you know, you have that personal touch.
Well, 2 or 3 times in the last month, somebody's like, I'm calling to talk to, they won't quite appreciate that they're talking to me until they're like, what's your name? I'm like, Chad Shannon. They're like, you know, like the Shannon Law Group. I said, yeah, I'm the owner. They're like, the owner picks up the phone? And I'm like, yeah, I couldn't imagine any other way. I mean, I may have a paralegal who helps me order medical records and, you know, other things that are administrative in terms of getting a case prepared, but I'm going to talk to you. You're going to talk to your lawyer when you want to talk to your lawyer.
So tell us a little bit about how you grew up. I know you said your parents were kind of in and out of hospitals, but did you come from attorneys, family, brothers and sisters? Tell us a little bit.
I grew up in Ohio, a brief stint in Massachusetts, which thankfully I didn't live there long enough to become a Patriots fan, but most of my life is in Pittsburgh. So I grew up in a suburb of Pittsburgh called Sewickley, Pennsylvania. My dad's currently the mayor of Sewickley. My parents didn't have health issues until they got older. So my dad was in sales. My mom was a homemaker, but then later in life, she started working in a bookstore, which she loved books. And she was so proud that a book was being made about her. So proud. She would just look at the outline. We gave her the outline. She would look at the outline for hours. Like she just loved the idea that her story was going to make a book. So we opened
and her
up.
son was writing it.
Exactly. My dad likes to say his story, my words. So, you know, it really is. It's clever. But so we opened up the sales. This is all anecdotal, so I don't want Stephen King's lawyers getting mad at me, but we opened up the sales at the bookstore she worked at. She passed away before the book came out. So we first sale was at that bookstore, and we sold something like 300 books in the first day. And wow. According to my dad, the owner of the bookstore said, you sold more than Stephen King last week. Stephen King was there. Stephen King was at the bookstore.
Oh, wow.
So Stephen King, despite being the amazing writer that he is, I read his book on writing. If you're interested in writing, you have to read that book. Amazing writer. I've heard many stories about him, a great person, but apparently we outsold Stephen King, which is a testament to who my mom was in that community.
Absolutely. I think he could give you a week out of the lifetime of sales that he had.
Yeah, exactly.
And I love him. He is my favorite author. If I'm going to read anything, it's his work.
Oh, he's great. He's great.
Yes.
People don't realize even now that he wrote Stand By Me. It was called The Body, and he wrote Shawshank Redemption.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah. You know, and that's my favorite movie too, The Shawshank Redemption, for whatever it's worth. Love it.
Now, he wrote a book called The Shining, which I read and liked, but nobody could have ever done the amazing work that was done with that movie other than Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah.
And Stephen King hated him for it because he totally changed the book. But that's the whole point. We've been talking a lot about what your story and people and cases, and like everybody has their own life and their own story, and it can be told so many different ways. Hiring the right lawyer and hiring the right expert is a way to make sure your story is told correctly.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think this has been a really amazing talk. I'm so thankful you had the time to meet with me today. How can people get in touch with you if they want to get in touch with you?
I still think the best way to get in touch with me is to call me. And so my work phone is 412-204-7103. I can also email me directly. You can email me at any time. I may or may not respond to it right away, but I encourage people to communicate when they want to. And that's Chad, CHAD, at THESLG LLC. And my website is www.THESLG.LLC. That's short for the Shannon Law Group. I have blogs, and I have blogs about a lot of these issues. Nursing home cases, hospital cases. I even have one about why My Cousin Vinny is a legally accurate movie.
Oh, well, that'd be interesting. So, and I'm sure there'll be something in and around this video, links that you can click on if you're looking to try to find Chad. So again, Chad, thank you for being on the show. And that brings us to the end of another episode, and we will see you on the next one.
Thank you so much, Tracy. This was so much fun. I've talked with you a few times about experts, but you seem to have a great group of people, and I'm looking forward to working with you at some point down the line.
Likewise. Thanks, Chad.
All right. Take care.
Statutes and Stethoscopes podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode.